Yay! Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Steph is so weird. I am Steph, and I've been reading. I've been reading The Curse of the Blue Figurine by John Bellairs, and we're on chapter 4. And my internet wasn't great yesterday, so I'm doing it today. It's only 6 pages, and chapter 5 is another 15-pager. So we'll see how long it takes me to get through chapter 4, and maybe I'll get through to some of chapter 5 if there's a good stopping point. So I don't have to read all 15 pages tomorrow. All right, let's go. Chapter 4. Johnny felt crushed. He felt cheated and humiliated and angry. He had been so sure, so absolutely sure, that he had found a genuine, bona fide Egyptian magic amulet. And now, to find out that the thing was a souvenir, a crummy, cheap, stupid souvenir. Johnny had souvenirs in his room. One was a small birch bark canoe that he had gotten when he visited Glen Ellis Falls in New Hampshire with his parents. There was the old crusty bronze handbell with a handle shaped like Father Geronimo, Junipero Serra. Father Junipero Serra. There wouldn't be a Geronimo. No. A priest who explored California in the 18th century. Yeah, no, we're not going to find a. Anyway, Johnny's uncle had gotten that in California, and he had given it to Johnny. And now Johnny gazed forlorningly at the professor. "Are you sure it's a souvenir?" he said weakly. "I mean, couldn't the label be a fake or something?" The professor had stopped laughing. He saw now that Johnny was very disappointed, and he felt sympathetic. "I'm sorry, John," he said, shaking his head sadly, "but I'm afraid this is a real, genuine souvenir and nothing more. I'm not an Egyptologist. My field is the Middle Ages, but this is just the kind of thing that a town like Cairo, Illinois would peddle as a souvenir. They pronounce it Cairo, by the way. It's a town down in the southern part of Illinois, and it happens to have the same name as the capital of modern-day Egypt. So somebody probably thought it was clever to make a souvenir that looked like an Egyptian ushabti." Ushabti. Oh, what? Johnny had never heard this strange word before. The professor was astonished. He knew that Johnny read a lot, and so, unreasonably, he thought that Johnny ought to know all sorts of obscure things. "You don't? Well, I never. Alrighty then. This is what a ushabti ushapti is. This is what an ushapti is." The professor paused and laid the figurine down on the desk. He stuffed out his cigarette, shoved his chair away from the desk, folded his hands in his lap, and stared dreamingly up at the ceiling. "First," he said, "you ought to know that the ancient Egyptians thought the next world, the place you go when you die, would be a lot like this world. And so in the next world, people would have work to do. Plowing and sowing, carrying water up from the river, making bricks out of clay, stuff like that. Well, to the Egyptians, it didn't seem right that the pharaoh would have to do work in the next world. It would be, well, it would sort of be like making the president of the United States polish his own car. So the Egyptians made these little dolls called ushabti, and they were supposed to do the work for the pharaoh in the next world. Sometimes they put whole armories of these ushabtis in the tombs with the pharaohs. They come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they look like dolls, and sometimes they're just miniature mummies, like this one here. The guy who designed the souvenir must have seen an ushabti in a museum, and he must have copied it. But this is a souvenir and nothing more. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm afraid that's the case." As Johnny listened to what the professor was saying, he found that he was struggling to find some way of proving that the figurine was really magic after all. Johnny was a stubborn kid about the things he believed. He did not give up easily. But, Professor, he said plaintively, what about Father Bart and the woodcarver and all that stuff? People always said that the woodcarver gave Father Bart something magic, didn't they? And that's that piece of paper there that with Father Bart's handwriting on it, isn't it? What about that? The professor turned to Johnny. There was a sheepish, sad look on his face. I'm afraid, my boy, he said, that I started all this business by telling you that ghost story. I am terribly sorry. I deserve to be punched. The trouble with me is I'd love to tell stories, and I like to make them seem as realistic as possible. Now, it is true that several people have claimed that they saw Father Bart's ghost in the church. And for all I know, they may really think that they did see him. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts, except when I'm telling ghost stories. As for the scroll here, he tapped the paper with his finger. It is Father Bart's handwriting. That much I can tell you. I used to be the official historian of St. Michael's Church, and so I know about things like that. But what does this prove? Not much. The whole business with the book, the figurine, and the warning note may have been Bart's idea of a joke, or he may have been serious. He may have thought this silly statue was really enchanted. Who knows? Johnny hung his head. Is it all fake then? The whole darn story? Did you make it all up? The professor shook his head vigorously. Oh, goodness, no. Most of the details in the story I told you were true. Mr. Herman and Mrs. Muma really did get killed, and Father Bart really did disappear. But the two deaths were just a coincidence. And I don't think that there was anything supernatural about Bart's disappearance. Bart was insane, and he probably had some insane reason for wanting to disappear. As for the note that was found on his desk, he probably wrote it himself. It's easy enough to disguise your handwriting if you want to do that sort of thing. The professor paused and flicked the ash off his cigarette. He gave Johnny a hangdog. He gave Johnny a hangdog, guilty look. I'm sorry to pull the rug out from under you this way, John, he said in a low voice. Next time I'll think twice before I tell a ghost story. But please don't think that this blue doojigger is magic. It isn't. Johnny sighed. He wanted to be mad at the professor, but he just couldn't manage it. In spite of his lousy temper, in spite of his love of making up things, the professor was a really nice guy. Johnny could tell that, and he felt that he could forgive the old man for having having told a few white lies. At this point, the professor glanced at his watch. He said that he had papers to grade and that he was going to have to chase Johnny out of the house. However, the professor added, grinning slyly, I would like to issue an invitation. This evening, after dinner, how would you like to come over for a game of chess and a piece of chocolate cake? I play a superlative game of chess, and the cakes I make are also excellent. How about it? Are you interested? Johnny nodded and grinned. He loved to play chess, but right now he didn't have a partner. Grandpa's game was checkers, and sometimes Johnny got very bored with it, and he was nuts about chocolate cake with chocolate frosting. So it was decided Johnny would come back after dinner and have dessert. But before he went, he had one more question. What should I do about this stuff? He said, pointing to the book and the two objects that lay inside it. Do you think I should try and take it all back? The professor thought a bit. He drummed his fingers on the desktop and he puffed his black and gold cigarette. I definitely think, he said at last, that you should not take these things back. In the first place, Father Higgins or Mr. Famagusha caught you in the basement of the church, there'd be hell to pay. And in the second place, it occurs to me that the blue figurine may be valuable. People collect things, you know, They collect salt shakers and medicine bottles and old flat irons and button hooks. The figurine's only a souvenir, but it's an old souvenir. 60 years old or more. I think you should write to Hobbies magazine and find out if your Dicky is worth something. In the meantime, however, if I were you, I'd keep the thing hidden. If your grandma sees it, she'll ask where it came from, and then where would you be? Just take it back and put it in your closet. First, though, you'd better make sure that the coast is clear. Come on, I'll go down with you and check. Excuse me. Ugh. Johnny took the book in his arms and followed the professor downstairs. At the front door, they stopped, and the professor peered cautiously out. Good, he said, nodding. They're not back yet. You'd better get while the getting is good. Bon voyage! And don't forget about our chocolate cake date tonight. I won't, said Johnny, grinning. Goodbye. While the professor held the door for him, Johnny raced across the street. Into the house he went and up the stairs to his room. Once again, he put the old black book in the bottom of his closet. Again, he piled stuff on top of it. Then he closed the closet door and went across the hall to wash his hands, which were dirty from handling the book. That evening at dinner, just as Grandma was about to serve dessert, Johnny announced that he had been invited over to the professor's house for cake and a chess game. He announced this shyly and hesitantly because he didn't know what Grandma's reaction would be. Grandpa was pretty easygoing sort. He usually let Johnny do what he wanted to do, but Grandma was more strict. And she didn't like the professor much. Furthermore, she was proud of her desserts. Johnny didn't want to hurt her feelings or make her angry. But all Grandma said was, "Humph, I guess it's all right." And she added in a disparaging tone, "I didn't know he baked cakes." Grandma had lived across the street from Professor Childermass for 20 years. But there was a lot of things she didn't know about him. Johnny excused himself and went across the street. He had a great time that evening. The professor was a crafty and merciless chess player. As for the cake, well, Johnny had theories about chocolate cake. He felt that the cake part of the cake was just an interruption between the layers of frosting. As it turned out, the professor's opinions about cake were similar to Johnny's. The cakes he served had 3 or 4 thin layers, and the rest was a huge amount of good, dark, thick, fudgy frosting. And he served second helpings, too. Around 10 o'clock that night, Johnny said goodbye to the professor and started across the street toward his house. He paused on the curb for a moment or two to look around. It was a beautiful, cold winter night. Icicles hung from all the houses, and they glimmered gray in the moonlight. Snowdrifts lay everywhere. In the street were ridges of ice, knotted with and iron hard. Johnny blew out his cloudy breath and felt contented. He had made a new friend, he was stuffed with chocolate cake, and he had won all 3 of the chess games they had played. Once more, he looked around, and then he stepped forward into the street. As he stepped, he happened to glance to his left, and he stopped dead. There was somebody standing across the street, watching him. Johnny stared. Who was it? He couldn't tell. All he could see was a short, stocky figure standing in front of Mrs. Kovacs' house. "Hi!" called Johnny, waving. No answer. The figure did not move. "Oh, well," thought Johnny, "it's probably Mr. Civitout." Mr. Swartout was a creepy little man who lived at the end of the street. He never said anything to anybody. Wouldn't give you the time if you asked him for it. Shrugging, Johnny walked straight. Oh my gosh. Shrugging, Johnny walked straight on across the street into his house. Later, upstairs, when he was in his pajamas and getting ready to climb into bed, Johnny looked out the window. His bedroom was at the front of the house. From it, you could see a good view of the whole length of Fillmore Street. He looked toward the place where the figure had been standing, but there was no one there. For some reason, Johnny felt relieved. Then he peeked out the moon, which was silvering and shingles up, which was silvering the shingles of the professor's house. Johnny yawned and climbed into bed, and very soon he was asleep. That is the end of chapter 4. It's only 15 minutes. I'm gonna dive into chapter 5 a little bit and just see where we go. Because that was, chess is great, and I agree about the chocolate cake. That was pretty great. That's tasty. I started to stumble on my words after that. All right, chapter 5. In the weeks that followed, Johnny and the professor became friends. It was an odd kind of friendship, the old man and the 12-year-old boy. But the friendship worked. Johnny was a shy kid. He did not feel at home with very many people, but he felt comfortable talking with the professor. At chess, they were pretty evenly matched. Johnny won about half the games they played. As for the professor's famous temper, well, he didn't use it around Johnny. He crabbed now and then, but he crabbed in a humorous and kidding way, so that Johnny always knew he was not being serious. Grandma, as you might guess, did not know what to make of their friendship and had developed between these two. She herself did not care much for the professor's company, but she didn't have anything serious against him. So she just sighed and shook her head and said many times that it takes all kinds to make a world. The blue figurine stayed in its box in Johnny's closet. One afternoon, when he was on his way home from school, Johnny took a detour and stopped in at the library. He went to the reading room and picked up a copy of Hobbies magazine. As the professor had said, it was a magazine for antique collectors. It was full of information about mechanical banks and oil lamps and bisque figurines and Toby jugs and Simon Willard clocks. And on one page, there was a question and answer column. Johnny sat down and copied the address of the magazine into a notebook he was carrying. Later, when he went back home, he went up to his room and got his Royal Portable Key typewriter. The Royal Portable Typewriter. He set it up on his bed and, kneeling in front of it, he pecked out a note. Dear Sirs, I own a blue statue shaped like an Egyptian mummy. It is old, and the label on the bottom says Souvenir of Cairo, Illinois. I wonder if this statue is valuable. Sincerely, John Dixon, 23 Fillmore Street, Dustin Heights, Massachusetts. P.S. Do not send a reply to my home. I will go to the library in the coming months to read your magazine and see if you have answered my query. Johnny folded this note up neatly, put it in an envelope, and printed the Hobbies magazine address on the outside. He slapped on a stamp and put the letter in his briefcase, and the next day, on his way to school, he dropped the letter into a mailbox. And he thought about how nice it would be if the blue gizmo turned out to be worth $50 or something like that. That'd be cool. March was a wintry month in Massachusetts that year. Seagulls battered the town. Sea gales battered the town, and the snow stayed on the ground. Life went on in its usual routine for Johnny for a while. But in the middle of March, some rather odd things started to happen. First, there was the problem of the spiders. One day, Johnny came home from school and found Grandma down on her knees on the parlor floor. She had a spray gun in her hands, and she was squirting insect spray along the baseboard. She looked upset. Hi, Grandma, said Johnny. He threw his books onto the couch and walked over to get a closer look at what his grandmother was doing. What you doing, huh? Grandma glowered. She hated stupid questions. What does it look like I'm doing, huh? I'm spraying away like crazy with this black flag insect stuff on account of the house is full of spiders. Spiders! Can you imagine it in the middle of winter? Johnny wanted to point out that it was not exactly the middle of winter, but more like the end of it. But Grandma didn't like being corrected, so he said nothing. He watched a few minutes as she shuffled along on her knees, spraying as she went. I haven't seen any spiders, said Johnny after a while. What kind are they? Those rotten little gray ones, Grandma grumbled. If you haven't seen them, you must have gone blind. Go into the kitchen and give yourself a look. You'll be lucky if you don't carry any away. You'll be lucky if they don't carry you away with them. Spiders in winter. Lord, where do you suppose they could be living? Johnny went out to the kitchen and looked. Sure enough, scooting here and there over the floor were small gray spiders. They were like the spiders that had been seen crawling he had seen crawling over the black book. Johnny felt an odd, queasy stirring of fear in his stomach. Quickly, he told himself that he should not let his imagination run wild. These were just spiders and nothing more. And to prove this to himself, he put out his foot and crushed one. The spider invasion lasted several days. Then, mysteriously, they disappeared. Grandma was convinced the black flag spray had done its work. Johnny was not so sure. Just a little more. Just a little. Nah. That's only 3 pages. All right, just a little more. Just a little more. One windy night, toward the end of March, Johnny went to the movies by himself. He went to see a spooky show called The Ghost Returns. By the time he got out of the theater, he was in a pretty nervous state. And as he made his way along the dark, deserted streets toward home, he began to get the feeling that someone was following him. This is a maddening and frightening feeling. As everyone knows, Johnny kept telling himself that it was all in his mind. But still, as he walked from streetlight to streetlight, he found his fear growing. Once or twice he stopped suddenly and spun quickly around, but there was never anyone there. When he got home, Johnny was somewhat taken aback to find that the house was dark. A note was taped to the window of the front door. Gone next door to visit, home later, key under mat, Grandma and Grandpa. Johnny got out the key and let himself in. He was determined to shake off the nervous, frightened feeling that had come over him. First he turned on some lights, then he marched straight out to the kitchen and got the pimiento flavored cream cheese and the crackers. Then he went to the parlor, planted himself in the bristly brown chair, turned on the radio, and sat back to listen and munch. It wasn't a spooky show. It was Camel Caravan, a musical program that did hit the tunes of the week. It did the hit tunes of the week. Vaughn Monroe was on it, and some other singers that Johnny liked. Nevertheless, as he listened, Johnny found his nervousness returning. He kept glancing toward the dark hallway of the room, but the doorway was always empty. At 10 o'clock, Grandma and Grandpa came home, and Johnny was very glad to see them. Grandma went straight up to bed. Grandpa hung around downstairs to talk with Johnny for a while, but he was pretty pooped, so he did not stay very long. After a few minutes, he went up to bed too, and Johnny decided it was a pretty lonely sitting around downstairs. Wearily, he climbed the steps. He washed up and brushed his teeth and put on his pajamas. Then he jumped into bed and pulled up the covers. Almost immediately, he went to sleep, and he had a very odd dream. He dreamt that he was back in Riverhead, walking down Main Street late at night. He was headed for the United Cigar Store. In real life, Johnny had gone to the United Cigar Store many, many times. He had bought his first deck of bicycle playing cards there, and he had picked up some other things too. Odd trinkets, like a ball and cup magic trick, a Chinese puzzle, a dribbling glass, a joy buzzer. Now, in the dream, he was going to the United Cigar Store again, though he really didn't know why. He passed the Sunoco station, and then there he was. And then he was there. He passed the Sunoco station, and then he was there. But what had happened to the store? Over the big red and white United Cigar sign, a weathered wooden slab had been hung. The letters on the slab are R. Bart's, Antique and Curios. In the midst of life, we are in death. Johnny looked up at the sign. It wasn't the sort of sign you usually saw, even on antique stores. But there was a light on inside, and for some reason, Johnny wanted very much to go in. As he started up the steps, he glanced at one of the display windows and noticed that the pipes and fishing reels and Kodak cameras were gone. Instead, the bottom part of the window was full of grayish sand, and from the sand, little blue mummy figures stuck out. Each one had a grinning skull for a face. Uh, Johnny opened the door and went in. The shop was dusty and disorderly. Gray spiders scurried across the floor. There was a heap of broken furniture in the back, and the only light came from a bare bulb that hung from a frayed black cord. There was a counter with a display case below, but the windows of the display case were so fly speckled and dirty that Johnny couldn't see what was inside. Behind the counter stood the proprietor of the shop. She was an old lady in a shapeless gray sack of a dress. She wore a large green eyeshadow. She wore a large green eye shade that covered the top half of her face. "Can I help you, young man?" The voice was horrible and croaking. Maybe I'll try that again then. "Can I help you, young man?" The voice was horrible and croaking. Johnny knew that the old woman was really Father Bart, but for some reason, he was not afraid. He said calmly, "I have come here in search of the answers to the mysteries of life." The old woman grinned. Johnny could see her wrinkled mouth and strong, jutted chin below the shade. He said, yeah, "Come around behind the counter then," she barked. "Step this way. Step fight this way." Johnny moved around behind the counter, and he saw, to his horror, that the old woman was standing in an open grave. Behind her was a gravestone, and all around was long matted grass. Johnny tried to turn and run, but his legs were like lead. The old woman had hold of his hand now, and she was pulling him down. He struggled. He planted his feet and tried to resist, but the old woman's grip was like an iron vice. The harder Johnny pulled, the closer he got to the grave. His feet were sliding inch by inch to the brink. And now he saw that the woman's face was a skull, a horrible, grinning skull, covered with black, crisscross strands of spiderweb. Johnny was screaming, but he couldn't hear any sound. And now he was plunging down. With a sudden jolt, Johnny woke up. He was trembling all over. Was there anyone in the room? No one that he could see. The room was dark and quiet. From far away came the steady rattling roar of a freight train that was passing through town. Johnny lay down and pulled the covers up over himself, but it was a long time before he could get to sleep again. Okay, I'm going to pause here because that's fun. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now he's having nightmares. Well, we learned a lot. I'm gonna find out if the figurine is worth anything. He's really good at chess, he likes chocolate cake, and like gray spiders everywhere. They just come and go. Like they were there and then they disappear. I don't know. It's kind of crazy. It's a lot. Well, we will find out tomorrow the rest of chapter 5. And thanks for being here. I hope you had fun. Like and subscribe if you did. And I'll see you then. Have a great day or night or evening or wherever you are. Good morning. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Till the next time.